what kind of a people leader in terms of being able to attract other people. In the end, it becomes a people game. So how are you able to actually bring on A players, people who are really ambitious? Are you a magnet for that kind of talent? And I think that's an important skill as well.
Welcome to another episode of Talks with T. Today, I'm humbled to have Muhammed Mekki with us, founding partner at AstroLabs.
Pleasure to be here.
So what is AstroLabs?
AstroLabs has been a journey for the last decade. Lewis and I started the company in 2013 on the heels of Namshi, so a founding experience here in Dubai. With really the objective of helping build the technology and digital ecosystem in the region. Yeah. And it's been evolving over time. So right now we build ecosystems really across UAE, Saudi, and the rest of the region. And we do that through helping companies come in from around the world, landing here in Dubai or in Saudi, co-working spaces, company setup, and hiring. And we also do it through our programmatic side. So we have capability building programs where we run incubators, accelerators, and trainings on different topics to help grow it kind of from the grassroots.
If you've lived in different places other than the UAE, you realize that if there's a place to be like in this window of life right now, and I guess in this window of history, and you probably see this you're at the forefront of this. There's probably no more exciting place to be than this part of the world right now, specifically Saudi and UAE.
No, I mean it's incredible to see the region on the radar now of classmates of mine who would normally just be in New York, London, maybe Singapore, are now coming here and are excited about setting up and being part of the story here. So I think for sure. Especially post-COVID, seeing how the country dealt with it, and just the opportunities that are available now as kind of like a more mature emerging market. Yeah. We're seeing that. I mean, the opportunity here and in Saudi in parallel are both phenomenal.
Yeah. And tell me about the origin stories of leaving, your consulting gig. Yeah. How you ended up starting Namshi.
Yeah, so it was actually less than a year in. So everything that I was programmed to be thinking was like, what, you got to spend at least 2 years, get what you need to get from this consulting job, and then think about something else. Yeah. But life doesn't always work that way. Yeah. And I think it was a very unique opportunity at the time. Had the opportunity to get some funding early. It was a early rocket internet venture, where I was reached out to saying, "Are you interested in maybe trying to do something in the region?" And that resonated with me big time. And so we had an opportunity to kind of get funding in an environment where funding was very difficult to get, and it was a matter of picking what model to do, basically what business to run, and finding other people, like-minded people. So I found Lewis Labos, who's been my partner from then, basically. We started at McKinsey in the same year and the same day, and he made the decision to leave immediately. It was within a couple of weeks we were kind of off and starting this thing, and it was there definitely was e-commerce at the time, but nobody was doing in-season fashion in this kind of way, which was actually a very expensive proposition because you needed to actually go procure all of the inventory, and it was a high-risk kind of game, but also high margin. So it actually had the potential to get to profitability. And so we decided to go for it, and it was one of these typical venture-backed, raise a bunch of money, hire 100 people, build out a team. In that process, going through it, we realized, this is kind of the beginning of a wave that's happening. We're starting to see a few more things pop up, and both Lewis and I were called to this idea of what can we do in order to be part of that. Having taken this experience and really be part of that genesis. And over some brainstorming sessions, we kind of came up with this concept of AstroLabs. Very different model, bootstrapped, a couple of guys starting it. And that was kind of I left, and then Lewis joined me, and we decided to just give this thing a go. And it was really just, let's wrap up our experience as founders into a program and take that all over the region and meet with founders. And this was circa 2013, 14. We're in Cairo, we're in Amman, in Riyadh, Jeddah, Khobar, Dubai, of course, meeting that, the tech founders of that era. And we were, it was very heartening and exciting because we saw the raw potential of what was there. And it kind of, we doubled down on sort of our excitement about this concept.
Yeah. And I guess it sounds like, you were looking for an opportunity, and then the Rocket Internet guys found the right guy. Wasn't it like, I mean, are you interested? You're like, you could have asked anyone else, this is... and then, so was it a prerequisite that you have another co-founder from their side, or was it they said, hey, how does that play out?
Yeah, I think it was taken for granted that this is not like a solo play. Trying to find other people, multiple co-founders. So the first person that came to mind was Lewis, and we. Noor and I, my wife and I, invited him over to the house, and we had dinner together, and then just kind of like, okay, here's what it is. Like, join me, let's do it. And he was also like very much in that same mindset, and hoping to make that transition himself. So we both took that jump, and I think learned a ton from. It was a great school as well in learning how to build a company. And in fact, we were actually in this building at a certain point in the and shifted a few times, and really kind of we learned firsthand. I remember. It was a small team, and just the era at the time of the challenges that we were facing were like, I was leading the customer service angle, and we didn't have like a team at the time. So I actually pick up the phone and would answer like these customers were kind of calling, and they're asking, the number one question we would get is like, where is your store in, and then name your
mall.
And eventually especially when we opened in Saudi, right? Where is your store, and name your tertiary city in Saudi. Like, well, actually that's not how it works. So not only from a tech ecosystem perspective, but from just a general, society perspective was quite early. But we were quite fortunate to have had that, firsthand experience. And that's what I think is the ethos of AstroLabs, is that it's, by founders, for founders. It's a very practical approach to doing some things that are quite critical to build the ecosystem.
Yeah. And what did you learn? So you brought Lewis. Were there other team members you brought along early in the journey?
Yeah, for sure. Hassam, who ended up becoming the CEO and leading the company up until its acquisition. Faraz Khalid was involved. Hisham Zarqa. Like we had a team that was executing on this. It was crazy times, and I think we're all proud to see the company still standing to this day, and having reached the size that it has, and the impact.
And what did you learn about assembling kind of a founding team, for the lack of a better phrase?
Yeah, I think the experience. I feel very fortunate to have intersected with Lewis, and then that decision even to go off and start something else together in terms of AstroLabs is finding the right marriage of partners is incredibly difficult, and obviously a combination of some fortune, but also being very self-aware about what you need and what the other person can bring to the table. And I think that no matter what, I'm also reflecting even over our years at AstroLabs, right? The importance of having multiple people at the helm is invariably your journey will have its ups and downs. But I think, by some kind of, mercy, generally, if you have multiple people, the pits of the pits, the other person won't be down there. They'll be at least somewhere else in that sine curve, right? So it's like you have a little bit of, pulling each other up, which we've experienced multiple times. And I think, finding the right person is as I mentioned, understanding what it is for you. So I know for me, having somebody that can always challenge and bring up another perspective, and I think that's one of the dynamics that we have quite well, is that devil's advocate approach. Being quite paranoid is another area where we think about a lot, is especially in a bootstrapped company, where you just don't have a lot of cushion and room for error. Being paranoid and thinking about what are the 10 things that could go wrong, and pushing each other on it, and then having a way to be able to divide up the what needs to get done, and in an effective way. There's several important ingredients to it, but I think in the end it's really an interpersonal. It's like do you click with the person, and do they have the right complementary components?
And then kind of even beyond that, Hassam's gone on to found Tabi.
100%.
For us at noon,
and
right?
now with Namshi, actually.
Now at Namshi full circle.
Yeah.
So it's clear that you did something right with kind of assembling the team broader than just, let's call it the first. So even the first hires, the first team members, what are you looking for there?
It's this, I think there's a thirst to learn is a really important trait. And that's something that I think we all have. We're kind of nerdy people at heart, and are always looking to learn from others, and have a self kind of correcting and willingness to change is really important. And I think that's probably one aspect. There's just a kind of the drive and the hunger for it. I think I'm talking about the things that really are hard to even teach afterwards, right? So if you have the innate willingness to learn, that's great. If you have this drive for the problem that you're trying to solve, and it's really striking some kind of chord for you, that's also kind of quite important. And then what kind of a people leader in terms of being able to attract other people. In the end, it becomes a people game. So how are you able to actually bring on A players, people who are really ambitious? Are you a magnet for that kind of talent? And I think that's an important skill as well.
And you were at Namshi for
2 years.
2 years. And tell me about kind of the journey starting to build that from, a place where people didn't even understand what e-commerce was to, that for those first 2 years. I mean, it was, I remember we had a crazy ambitious plan to just, within a few months have this thing, website launched, everything running, right? And the most anticlimactic moment actually was when we launched the website. Right? You were expecting like fireworks, like okay, someone jumping out.
It's live. So it was live, and then we're just tracking. Okay, visits or whatever, and then there's like an order. It's like, oh, okay. It's like, okay, no, sorry, that's like, that's Lewis's mom. It's like, all right. It's like, and then it was until it was like, oh, is that your sister? No, is that what it was? Is that your? No, that's actually a new customer. So I think the early days were very slow. It was like, remember we had a board. It was like, the date and the number of orders. But it was like 0, 1, 0, 0, and then. It was a matter of there was a lot of trial by fire and just learning as we're doing, because there weren't, even with the partners like at Facebook, at Google, where we're doing ads in ways that others aren't doing, right, in the region, and at volumes that weren't really being done. So there was that kind of the customer acquisition side, trying to crack what works and how would we not just flush away money because people, So some things we learned at that stage were the importance of anchor and marquee brands, especially in such an early ecosystem, for people to have the trust with this platform and say, okay, they see a Polo or an Adidas or whatever the brand is on the site, but that the long-term strategy was actually to move as much to private label as possible because the margins are much higher, right? But getting those brands, I remember, Shellhoop Group. Was the first major win we had in terms of getting their portfolio of brands, and it was going and trying to convince that the team there to actually just be able to buy the product, and it was challenges we never thought we would have, which is like, we have money. We want to buy stuff, and we're not even asked for terms, anything complicated. We just want to buy stuff. But there was this question: it's like, what is this website? Is my stuff going to be next to a refrigerator? Is it like there were these questions that we didn't anticipate having. But then once you break the barrier, it was those earliest days which I think were the hardest. You break the barrier, you get a couple of brands which other peer brands look up to. Then we were able to grow that, and in fact, then show performance and get terms on purchases, and be able to sell the stuff before we have to pay for it, and that helps with obviously scaling. I was much more involved in the operations and the challenges around the logistics of warehousing and then the shipping and making sure the stuff and the cash on delivery and all these logistical challenges, which were also very nascent in the region. There was so many learnings, I guess, and that's what one of the things that we tried to do is say, okay, we saw all of that firsthand and like tried to solve all of it. It's like there's some learning in there that we wanted to kind of turn into something, right? And I think that's part of also just our this drive to always be learning and teaching and thinking. So that was all the fodder that turned into Scaling Online Startups, which is this program that we ran. And that was really fun to be able to transmit some of that stuff and also learn from all of these other founders who are going through those challenges in Cairo or wherever they are, and add to that body of knowledge.
And so it sounds like there was almost like a calling for you. So do you remember the moment at which you started saying, I actually want to transition out of Namshi and do something else? Do you recall when that happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think going into it kind of breaks one of the rules, which is, was I super passionate about, selling fashion online? No, all right, that wasn't, but it was like an opportunity that was so unique. So even going into the whole thing, it was like, I was much more passionate about this idea of what does entrepreneurship ecosystem look like in this region. Obviously, the concept for AstroLabs had not yet been hatched at that time, but I knew that I needed to actually do it. And then, it was just, it was, I don't know if there was a single moment, but it kind of did, I think that before grew, and it felt like it was the right time. And I was just much more willing to take a risk, and in this case, try a completely even different model and try things in a new way. And it was an awesome journey.
Why? Where do you think this comes from? This it sounds like you had this desire, even from when you were in the Bay Area. You had this desire to drive some sort of impact in the Middle East in the tech space. And then you got into the tech space, and it sounds like you felt we can drive a bigger impact on a fabric level versus, going deep in one domain.
Yeah.
Where do you think that came from, that desire?
I think it's been in the making for many, many years. And it probably started maybe even when I applied for my undergrad program, which was this international business program that I did. It was, and with my anchor language is, Arabi, even though I was speaking it informally, but like to go in and learn the language deeper and do a study abroad and live, in the region and experience it. And then after that, I actually did a Fulbright fellowship, and I lived in Damascus and then Sharjah. And I was researching a topic, Islamic finance at the time, and also just building my kind of base skills, if you will. And that was Sharjah, circa 2006. So I kind of saw the UAE as well at that time, and then it was, I think it was the combination of that interest in the region with my experience in business school and being in Silicon Valley that said, okay, maybe I can bring these things together, and then come out here to do something, to be really a part of that. And that journey actually continues. So one of the things that I'm doing now is, as I've now had this firsthand experience of building and operating a venture-backed company, to kind of doing this ecosystem building through AstroLabs, still have an interest to make an impact on kind of a country level, and even with the strategy of how innovation ecosystems are developed. And so the nerd in me went back to school again. So over the last few years, I've actually been pursuing a PhD in this topic. So I've been researching innovation ecosystems and looking at Dubai as a case study. And that's been a completely different skill set. But the idea is that if I can know it from an academic standpoint, as well as from a very practical standpoint, there'd be an opportunity to make an impact in the other countries that are going through other transitions, whether it's in Saudi or eventually Iraq, as things kind of stabilize and start growing there. So I still have this calling, and I think it's the scope is changing over time, but I'm just kind of building on it piece by piece. I'm not exactly sure where it will end up, but I'm kind of taking it a step at a time.
Yeah, no, it's a inspiring North Star, and I think it also reiterates, even for companies, the need to have a North Star. You may not know what shape or form or what the path you take that leads you there, but having that North Star just guides your approach, guides your thinking, and allows you to evolve with time.
100%. And I think the cool thing to reflect on the journey of AstroLabs is that although we've added a ton and done different things that expanded, and that's still that seed from the very beginning, and that interest in making an impact in terms of capability building and doing the hard things over a long period of time. I think that was the other thing that I really learned through this last experience. I've always been somebody that has hopped a lot. And I think that's what drew me to consulting. And I get bored quickly, and I even in college I would be the one person taking like 6 classes instead of 4, just because it's like, well, there's so many cool things to learn about. and I think that I wish I had been counseled against that. It's not like you're Superman, you can do all these things. It's actually I feel now that that's not as an effective way to kind of learn or to. And I've seen that now firsthand through it. Instead of spending a year or 2 or 3 doing something, 10, the depth of learning that you can achieve. And I have a lot more. I see a lot more value in these longer pursuits.
Yeah.
And even in what it does for me as as Muhammed, and as the impact that I can make.
Yeah, I think to a large extent these longer pursuits. I was having this conversation with one of our team members the other day, and he was telling me that, I've been kind of doing the same thing for the past 3 years. And when I told him, I said, listen, I think you get to define what that role looks like. I told him, as a founder, in theory, you've been doing the same role until you no longer are, but what you do and where you focus and what you decide to pursue develops based on your ability to say, cool, I think I've got this, but what's behind that door? And you have the ability to do that even though you're on paper doing the same thing. And I think a lot of people have this preconceived notion that in order to get new experiences, I have to leave what I'm doing and go do something else, versus I can go deeper, open new doors, discover new opportunities, solve new challenges.
100%. And in fact, if you are in the same environment, your ability to go deeper is much higher. You have more doors open for you because you become a subject matter expert. And even what you see, the opportunities that you see are manifold. And I think that's the element that people maybe who are samplers don't appreciate as much, because you kind of are always waiting at the surface.
Yeah. And so what led you to decide to set up AstroLabs in a bootstrapped fashion versus a venture-backed fashion?
Yeah, I think it was a discovery process. I think in the beginning, we thought, let's first start with doing this program and see what happens. The business model wasn't clear at the time. In fact, we were sponsor driven. I mean, we were, many thanks to folks like Aramex and PayPal at the time, and a couple of organizations in Saudi that sponsored us to run these programs. Because you think about the business model here. You're bringing a small group, right, 20 people into a room
who don't have money.
Who don't have money, exactly, right. The worst thing is a services company for entrepreneurs. So I think we didn't know where we were going with it. We knew we had this passion. We knew that there was a need, and we knew that also what we had delivered, at least in those first couple of iterations, were really resonating. I mean, there was something there. There was a moment where also we were kind of like, is this going anywhere? Are we going to be able to turn this into a real business? It was like, we're barely making enough money just to be able to subsist. Where we were able to, through a introduction from one of our participants, so Shantokanayan was part of our first program that we ran in Dubai with Glambox at the time.
Okay.
And he was still at Google, kind of transitioning off. Yeah. And he made an introduction to the Google for Entrepreneurs team.
Okay.
And they were sponsoring or supporting companies like, Startup Weekend and huge organizations across. And they gave us a shot. And I think, we were two people doing something that had a big ambition, but we were affiliated now with Google, right? And that was a huge boost for us. And then we actually, we were about to raise money at a point when we had plans. We were doing the first co-working space.
Yeah.
And we even had terms, group of angels, and documents. We'd been through diligence and everything. It was literally, it was just writing on the signatures.
Yeah.
And they were all in different places and whatever. And they just, there was some dragging that was happening. One day, Louis and I kind of woke up and we sort of like called each other and we're like, you know what? This thing's been taking a long time. I think we can do it without this money. And we're like, should we do it? Should we risk it?
Yeah.
And we just called it off. We just had like a feeling that, you know what, forget it. Yeah. Let's just try it on our own, right? And, I think in retrospect, it was the exact right decision to make because of the flexibility and everything and everything that's happened over time. But definitely there were down periods where we're like, having a cushion would have been.
Having some money in the bank would have been good.
Would have been good, yeah.
I'd love to hear one of those stories,
yeah.
Because I think, one of the core reasons I started this podcast is to be able to have the stories that don't make it on,
Yep.
LinkedIn. We raised X amount, but no one knows what's happening on the inside. Sometimes people, when we raised our Series C round, I'd get messages and calls from non-founders who would say, congrats. And then from founders who I have a pretty close relationship with would be like, good luck, man. For you to raise this round, I know that means it took a lot of work to get there and stuff. So I think people don't hear the stories of where we almost lost the company or where we almost ran out of cash.
The first 3 to 4 years were very difficult. I think I'm a big proponent of bootstrapping generally. I think bootstrapping in this market is doubly difficult because it does take time and it's expensive to get things off the ground, and we hadn't figured out what our model was. So there were multiple points in the first few years. I mentioned early on, even while we were still doing scaling online startups, and we were kind of sponsorship driven, right? And, leadership changed in a couple of the organizations. We were getting ghosted on emails about the ones that we thought were going to, sponsor the upcoming program. And we ended up running one with basically for free. I mean, we were paying for everything out of pocket. And it was just, we had just come off of a stretch where we're going kind of like back to back. We did I think, we were in Jeddah and Cairo, and we were just in Amman. Just kind of like, is this does this model is this going to work? As we're saying, we're trying to charge the people who had the least money in markets. Also, imagine you're going to Cairo.
Exactly.
I remember we charged like $100 or something, right? It was like just something so that people would have commitment to come. Like, you know what? Yeah, all about ecosystem building, but it's got to be a company that is going to be a profitable, self-sustaining. We never from the beginning wanted to be one of these fly-by-night, be something that gets some kind of government grant that runs out and then the company ends because it has no inherent, product or sustainable business model. So that was probably one where it was a pretty low point. And I think we were rejuvenated by a really amazing intersection that happened between one of our sponsors of scaling online startups, which was the DMCC, the Free Zone, and just an opportunity that came out of nowhere, which was that they had lined up a deal with a UK-based co-working space kind of company to come and open up in the Free Zone, and had gotten all the approvals, right? And we're Lewis and I were sitting with our counterpart there, James, and James is like he's just kind of telling us like as a story, not like as a and he's just saying and he was championing this internally, and Lewis and I kind of look at each other, we're like, well, we do that, we can run a co-working space. And I think it was a moment of like, there was this opportunity there that was kind of lined up. We knew Google across the world was in this mode of helping kind of sponsor hubs that were run by partners. So there was kind of that end. So we told him, listen, we got Google, we'll bring Google. And then we went to Google, we're like, we got the Dubai government. And then suddenly there was this formula that came together that kind of just breathed new life into what we were doing, which is that, okay, let's bring together in a physical space, people. And that added a new dimension to the business that honestly we hadn't planned for when we first began, right? It was a logical next step. And I think there was a period in which life was pretty good after we had gotten, again, there was another challenge. There was the pits of, wow, we just signed crazy rent checks, right? When you sign a rent check for like your house or whatever, we signed rent checks for like the facility and on money that we didn't have, and so there was personal liability. There was a lot of like, is this going to work? Are we going to be able to fill this thing up, right? And then the project was delayed in terms of construction, and we ran into a lot. There was another like big dip at that stage, but I think once we were able to be inside our space and see the quality of the community, really, and that's been one of the big differentiators and something that you can't pay any amount of money for, right? You can't go off and buy a high quality community. That's the hard work of just bringing a person at a time. That led to another sort of like, okay, it feels like we have something there. To the point where we were just like, we were running a profitable business. It was okay. And Lewis and I were like, okay, should we just find something else to do? And, so there was this moment where also we're like, should we just kind of stop here, basically? And we couldn't get ourselves really as excited about doing anything else. We would brainstorm and we're like, but we could do this but we could like make this a part of Astro, we could do that. And then at the same time, we also intersected with Roland, and that was a game-changing sort of like moment in the history of AstroLabs. And we'd known Roland Daher for many years, when from his time at WAMDA, and then we as a partner when he was running Dubai 100, which is a health tech accelerator program. We were somehow able to convince him to sort of join a super tiny kind of company that had big ambitions as the chief operating officer, right? And I think that was a new kind of like upswing, bringing new life to the organization, also with high ambition. And we told him from the outset, this can be your company to run. It's really, we would love to see this become a situation where you transition from COO to CEO of your own management team, and you're running the company in the coming years. And that's the journey that ended up happening.
And what did you learn along the way in terms of how to tweak your approach and kind of continue to, I don't want to say the word pivot, but to a large extent assess new opportunities and say, do we pursue them? Are they a distraction? Is there something at the end of this road, or is it taking us in a completely different direction, which doesn't come under our core ethos?
Because we do so many things, we've had that discussion a lot of times. I mean, we're by design the opposite of what advice you get from investors, which is really to focus. And maybe this is the legacy of exactly what I was talking to you about, is that we're just so interested in so many different things.
It's a reflection of your
exactly.
Your
so
psyche.
we're kind of like but also to be fair to us, I think, is that if the mission is about ecosystem building, that is a multi-pronged approach, and in fact having many elements to it actually helps the whole puzzle come together. So as an example, when we're running an accelerator, incubator, or training program, what we can pull from is so differentiated. We've helped over 1,000 companies set up between Dubai and Saudi over this last period. Those founders, the work and that we've built into the IP of like the Open Academy courses, the classes that we run, all these different elements kind of come together nicely to kind of feed each other. So if a company now is entering into Saudi from another geography, well, we can plug them in. We have hiring, we have other founders that they can meet, we have a co-working space, we've been building it all. But I think to your question, there are distractions, and there are things that are high value versus not. And I remember there was a point at which we were obsessing about our courses, the Open Academy courses of digital marketing and data science and the other topics that we cover in coding, and it's like, have we filled the seats, and how are we going to get these next 10 seats filled? And it became a topic of obsession by the management team, and we're being distracted from, well, how are we going to get this next massive program that we're going to be doing, right, and have much bigger impact, etc. So it's always hard to stop doing stuff, but we've definitely toned down that that used to be the core, right, of the business. Really, we've toned it down in terms of looking at that as a profit maximizing sort of entity, to having it be top of funnel for a lot of the programs that we run, and keeping a nice steady stream happening of courses. But we've kind of reconstituted it based on this prioritization. And then also whatever doesn't fit into that circle that I was saying, like kind of the things that would feed each other. Even thinking about our talent practice and the hiring, we used to hire for anyone for anything. Yeah. And now we're like quite focused on helping companies build their teams in Saudi when they're entering, mostly through the channel of when we're setting them up, right? So it becomes very complementary versus just being spread out all over the place. Yeah. Right? That's a couple of examples.
Yeah. And so in your journey with AstroLabs, what's kind of the point at which you decide to take a step back from managing day to day and then handing the reins over to Roland, who was COO at the time?
Yeah, so it was, Roland, Lewis, and I were working in the same room for multiple years, right? Yeah. So we were like very much aligned in terms of our approach to things. Not to say that we weren't challenging each other, but we had the ethos. We benefited from really having spent all of that time together, and so I think it was a natural progression as soon as we and he felt he was ready to take the next step up. And there's never a good time. It was actually like around COVID. I mean, it was not an easy period. Yeah. And in fact, so we didn't, and also it wasn't this like immediate like, okay, Roland, it's your thing. Yeah. And it's been a transition. Yeah. But I say with mixed feelings, the company has like never been better actually. Yeah. Right? He's done a phenomenal job of also just breathing new energy and building his management team and his approach. But we're involved. We're an active board. You can imagine is he's able to leverage us for the things that we're particularly passionate about, good at, or whatever. And so that's given us an ability to still have a leg in, but him having the control over and the mandate to take it to the next level.
And for you, this is your baby.
Yeah.
What have you had to do to make sure that you're giving him enough space to execute, but also being there to support where required?
Yeah, I think it's having done something for almost a decade, right? And then it's like suddenly
it almost becomes your identity.
Yeah, it's like I'm not at the office anymore. I go, pass by once a week, and it was definitely, it took some time to let it sink in. But I think the important thing was also just having other priorities and things to fill up the time. I'd mentioned, I had started this program kind of on, researching and such, and I kind of doubled down on it. And I started advising a VC fund in Saudi called Khwarizmi Ventures, and a few different, projects. Yeah. Also with the eye of eventually maybe starting something else. And I think it's just that looking at it more in terms of the opportunities that it opens up, and that the company's in the hands of somebody that I really have a lot of respect for and I trust, and I'm able to jump into the areas that I can add the most value or I'm most passionate about. And he's brought new life and kind of like a renewed sense of energy. I think no matter what, after 8 years doing something, it's still, that day to day, it's nice that, to have somebody who's just like, boom, kind of like ready to really take it up a notch, right? Yeah. So it hasn't been as hard of a transition because I think we've been mentally prepared for it for a while. The right person was there, and sort of other things had filled the time.
Yeah, I think one thing I've heard from some founders is they've transitioned out is almost kind of my identity my personal identity was so tied to the company that if I'm no longer in the company, what is my identity? And so
I think because we're a bit of a unique case, and it's a bootstrap company. So it's owned by Louis, myself, Roland, the sort of management team. So I think it's a scenario where I'm able to change hats from, let's say, operator to investor within this, and still be affiliated with the company. So I feel like super lucky, like I get to have my cake and eat it too, or whatever. Like I'm still able to be involved. And I'm still very passionate about the calling and what can be done to kind of take it to the next level.
You mentioned earlier in the conversation that you're a huge proponent of bootstrapping for as long as possible.
I think there's a bit of a self-awareness in that as well, about what kind of environment do I thrive in, and I like that sort of smaller environment, trying to crack something, being very paranoid about sort of turning it into something that makes money, being very close to the customer, figuring it all out. And I'm not as obsessed about speed and scale, from an early stage. And I'm willing to do something for a long time, right? I think these elements are prerequisites. It's a completely different journey, but I think that the discipline it builds, and how closely you are attached to the market and understand what makes the business run, and kind of building a solid business that we were able to survive through COVID, which honestly was not what was not taken for granted. I mean, when we started, it's like we did everything in person. It was like a tough time where we didn't even run any courses online. It was just like everything was in person, co-working spaces, courses, all this stuff. And it was a big moment. But I think because of the diversified lines of business that we had, we had recurring revenue coming from, the space, and we had a few things happening. It was kind of built into the company that we need to be careful, that stuff could go sideways, and we need to be very careful. So when we had an opportunity, for instance, to really scale up the co-working side, we took a decision not to do that because of the risk of like, okay, what if property sort of, what if the dynamics change in a big way? So a lot of that mindset, I think you're kind of, and then the challenge becomes, for founders and for the team that was there early days, is how do you start effecting a shift from being like the cheapest possible? I mean, I remember we went back looking at our books early days, where we weren't doing proper accounting, and we had to report on taxes and all this stuff. And so we had the accountant go through, and she was like, but you guys don't have any expenses. Like, what's going on? Like, where's the office? There's not even like a company license, nothing. We like bartered for everything. We were the cheapest possible people. So DMCC was a sponsor, and they bartered. So we bartered for the license itself, right? So imagine we had a closet of a space in Almas Tower that was just like an unused place that we got to use. So that spirit, then when you start to move to the next level, you want then yourself and the rest of the team to be willing to make the smart investments, right? It's not about being cheap. It's really about being efficient with your money, right? And I think that efficiency ethos is one that is born through a bootstrapped environment, is one of the many benefits of being a bootstrapped company. And I think it's just, you can get quite sloppy when you have a lot of money on the table.
Yeah. You make expensive mistakes. Yeah.
I think it's obviously that has its benefits, and it's amazing to be able to scale up so quickly, make a bigger impact faster, all these things. I mean, and again, this is my point, is that it's not necessarily one is better than the other. It's about also there's a lot of introspection that needs to happen. Is like, where do I want? And I think one of the things that also led to a very effective partnership between myself and Louis from early days was that we both had a similar perspective about how we wanted to run this thing. That it wasn't going to be, we're going to be, working, 20-hour days, and we're going to, try to, that it's okay that, we can build this thing in a way and in a style that is sustainable, but still having really high ambitions and wanting to make a big impact, but not having to report into somebody, or not having to there's nobody that can ask us a question about what we do, which is, that's a huge benefit, right?
Yeah, that's quite liberating, I'd imagine. Yeah. So, and then you've seen obviously a lot of entrepreneurs come through the programs.
Yeah.
How would you distill what you've seen some of the best entrepreneurs do to succeed in that first phase? So going from, I have an idea and I want to get to product market fit, and I want to commercialize this opportunity. Yeah, we've seen a lot of them through the programs that we run or in our spaces over the years, and it's always nice when you just you spot the one or two out of that batch that just have that spark, and it's that tenacity and their willingness to put themselves out there. I think it's the typical thing of a founder. The hardest thing is actually to expose your concept to the world. And that's what leads to a lot of the very textbook reasons for failure of cooking too much before you find out that nobody wants what you're cooked, and all that kind of stuff. But where does that come from? I think it's kind of like this insecurity that we all have. It's like, well, this is my amazing idea that I need to make sure it's perfect, and then I'm going to bring it to the world, and everybody's going to love it, right? Whereas those who have that willingness to just, go out, talk to people, they have that they have a sales kind of comfort, if you will, and then again that willingness to learn and adapt, I think is like the ones especially that we see that are just ingesting the content and asking questions and figuring out how is this going to apply, right? You have the people in the batch that are the theoretical ones that are just like asking these weird questions about, but what if blah blah blah, right? And they're in a different zone. And you have the people there that are like, okay, I need to learn this in order to do X, Y, and Z, and they're on it, right? So they have a learning mindset. They're willing to go out there and actually put themselves and their idea and what they've done in front of people, even if it leads to embarrassment or it leads to, and in fact, they're looking for that kind of feedback, right? And then they have some kind of, insight into what they're doing in the market. They have some experience. I think that's the other element, that it's like somebody that's coming from some kind of background where they have a competitive advantage in some way. In what they're tackling, usually will lead them again to the earlier point that we were talking about the depth. When you have a bit of depth, you can then see the doors, and you can see where you might be able to take the company, especially when you're going to have to pivot in the future. Yeah. I heard you say a couple of things in our discussion today. I heard you talk about this. What I interpreted was, being a nerdy person at heart. In other words, having a learner's mindset goes a long way. You touched on the need to have anchor brands to help you grow, both in the context of Namshi, but then even kind of using Google to get other opportunities. And I think that's a really smart marketing and growth hack that probably I hadn't thought of before. We talked a little bit about spending time to go deep in an area. There's a lot of merit to doing that versus having shiny object syndrome. And this idea that bootstrapping is actually about making smart investments. And so I've had a lot of fun chatting with you today. Thank you very much for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.